Not your battlefield, girl. Those dismissive words echoed in her mind as she adjusted the scope on her Barrett .50 caliber rifle. Until her weapon's thunderous report rolled across the valley, they never understood what she was capable of. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The thunder of the Barrett .50 caliber rolled across Spruce Hollow like a forgotten promise. Iris McCready lowered the weapon slowly, her weathered hands steady, despite the recoil that would have knocked a younger person backward. The frost-dusted camo pants she wore had seen better days, much like their owner, but both still served their purpose. Birds scattered in panicked clouds against the pale Montana sky, their wings beating a frantic rhythm that echoed her own quickening heart. For 29 years, the rifle had remained wrapped in oilcloth, buried beneath floorboards in her barn, alongside memories she'd tried to forget. 29 years of silence, of tending her small plot of land, of watching seasons change across the valley with only the occasional visit from neighbors who respected her need for solitude. The retired veteran had built a life measured in quiet mornings and the gentle rhythms of rural existence. Never again. She had whispered to herself all those years ago, when she'd returned from overseas with shadows behind her eyes that her neighbors politely pretended not to notice. The morning air bit at her face as she scanned the valley below. From her position on the ridge, Iris could see the entire sweep of Spruce Hollow, the scattered homesteads, the alpaca farm where her friend had reported sick animals, the winding creek that had run clear for generations until last spring. The 67-year-old woman adjusted her silver braids, tucking them back under her worn cap as the rising sun painted the mountains gold. Something had changed in the valley. She could taste it, a metallic hint beneath the pine and snow, like blood in the mouth. The surveyors had arrived 3 weeks ago with their instruments and corporate logos, their polite smiles masking intentions that made her stomach knot with familiar dread. They spoke of progress and opportunity while marking trees that had stood sentinel since before her grandfather was born. Iris ejected the spent cartridge, catching it reflexively. The brass was still warm against her calloused palm, a small heat against the morning chill. She hadn't meant to fire the weapon, not really. But when she'd spotted the unmarked vehicle trespassing near the protected watershed before dawn, something primal had awakened inside her. The shot had been deliberate, a warning fired into the hillside, far from any person, but close enough to send a message. Spruce Hollow was not undefended. As she made her way down the slope toward home, Iris knew with bone-deep certainty that the quiet life she built was ending. The community she loved stood at a crossroads, and despite her vow of peace, she could not stand aside and watch it fall. Spring arrived in Spruce Hollow with more than just melting snow and budding wildflowers. It brought strangers in gleaming vehicles that looked out of place against the weathered pickup trucks of locals. Iris McCready watched from her porch as another convoy of black SUVs wound up the valley road, their tinted windows reflecting the Montana sunshine. Sustainable energy pioneers, they called themselves at the town meeting last week. Their spokesperson, a woman with a smile that never reached her eyes, had presented colorful digital renderings of wind turbines and solar arrays that would bring Spruce Hollow into the 21st century. But Iris had lived 67 years, and she recognized the familiar scent of deception. The truth emerged in hushed conversations at the general store and in documents carelessly left visible during presentations. What they really wanted was to transform the sacred lands into an exclusive alpine resort for the wealthy. The sustainable part was merely window dressing, a few token solar panels on rooftops of luxury chalets that would sell for millions. Iris sipped her morning coffee as she observed 3 men in pressed khakis, hammering survey stakes into ground that had belonged to the Blackfeet long before Montana was even a territory. One of them laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like an intrusion. These weren't people who understood the land. They didn't know how the north wind changed direction 3 weeks before the first frost, or which slopes harbored the most delicate wildflower colonies. Yesterday, she had hiked to Eagle Creek, only to find its usually crystal waters running murky with silt. The preliminary excavation upstream had already begun to affect the watershed. Mara Doyle from the library had called her in tears after finding out that the developers had somehow accessed restricted historical documents, land deeds that proved indigenous claims to several parcels now marked for development. The community was changing too. Some younger residents spoke excitedly about potential jobs. Others, like Eugene Harper, who ran the local radio station, used his airtime to question what these changes would mean for their way of life. Even Tessa Caldwell, who struggled to make ends meet as a single mother, seemed torn between economic opportunity and preservation of their heritage. Iris placed her empty mug on the porch railing and straightened her back. She could feel the heartbeat of Spruce Hollow, faltering as unfamiliar boots trampled across meadows where generations had harvested medicinal herbs. The valley had survived harsh winters, forest fires, and economic hardship, but this threat came disguised as progress, making it all the more dangerous. She knew in her bones that this was just the beginning. Iris McCready's eyes missed nothing. Where others saw a perfectly ordinary morning in Spruce Hollow, she cataloged the discordant notes, the way Mr. Peterson's alpacas huddled together, refusing water from the stream that had always sustained them. 3 had died last week. The rancher blamed old age, but Iris knew better. She walked the perimeter of her property daily, fingers brushing against pine trunks marked with bright orange protected species tags. Fresh chainsaw scars marred several, the wounds still sticky with sap. The developers had promised to preserve these ancient sentinels, yet another broken oath to add to her mental ledger. "Damn fools think no one's watching," she muttered, adjusting her worn canvas hat against the Montana sun. The silver-haired woman had spent 29 years cultivating invisibility in this valley, perfecting the art of being overlooked. Now, that same careful observation was becoming her greatest weapon. Even the wind felt wrong. The morning easterlies that once swept clean and crisp now carried the metallic tang of construction equipment and diesel fumes. Birds nested differently, higher up than before, as if retreating from the ground itself. Back in her cabin, Iris brewed coffee and spread out topographical maps across her kitchen table. Her fingers, still nimble despite arthritis, traced the contours of land she knew better than her own face. The former soldier had come to Spruce Hollow seeking anonymity after what she'd witnessed overseas. Villages emptied, lands poisoned, all in the name of progress. "Not again," she whispered. "Not here." That night, dreams of distant deserts and screaming children jolted her awake. Her hands reached instinctively for a weapon no longer beside her bed. The ghosts of her military past never truly left. They merely hibernated, waiting for circumstances to awaken them. The following morning, Iris found tire tracks cutting across the wildflower meadow where the town's children gathered blueberries each summer. Something inside her shifted, like the sound of a rifle bolt sliding into place. Gene had called yesterday from the radio station, his voice tight with concern. "They're filing permits faster than we can contest them, Iris." She hadn't responded then. What could one aging woman do against corporate lawyers and political connections? But standing in that trampled meadow, watching a monarch butterfly struggle to find purchase on crushed goldenrod, Iris felt the weight of her silence. The cost of inaction was becoming clearer than the price of stepping forward. That evening, she unlocked the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Beneath quilts and old photographs lay the case she'd sworn never to open again. Her hands trembled not with age but with recognition of what she had been and what she might need to become once more. The knock came just after 3, sharp and insistent against the weathered pine of Iris McCready's front door. She wasn't expecting visitors. She rarely did, and her hand instinctively moved toward the drawer where she kept her sidearm before catching herself. On her porch stood Tessa Caldwell, clutching her jacket tight despite the mild afternoon. The young woman's eyes were rimmed red, but her jaw was set with determination that reminded Iris of soldiers she'd known. "I need to learn how to shoot," Tessa said without preamble, her voice steady despite the slight tremble in her hands. "Not to hurt anyone, to protect Jamie and myself." Iris studied her visitor carefully. She'd seen Tessa around town, always with her 5-year-old son in tow, working double shifts at the diner while building a life from scratch. The single mother had moved to Spruce Hollow 8 months ago, carrying secrets as visible to Iris as if they'd been tattooed on her skin. "Come in," Iris finally said, stepping aside. "There's coffee." Over steaming mugs at the kitchen table, Tessa explained about the strange car that had followed her twice now, and the threatening letter slipped under her apartment door. She didn't mention names, but Iris noticed how her eyes darted toward the window when a vehicle passed on the road. "I'm not asking to become some kind of vigilante," Tessa said, "but I need to know I can defend us if—" She didn't finish the sentence. The 67-year-old woman nodded, understanding the weight of fear carried by someone responsible for a child's safety. She'd sworn never to teach another person to fire a weapon, yet something in Tessa's quiet resolve broke through decades of self-imposed isolation. "We start with safety," Iris finally said. "Always safety first." Over the following weeks, they established a routine. Tessa would arrive after her morning shift, and they would work with unloaded firearms first. Proper stance, breathing, respect for the weapon. The younger woman proved a quick study, absorbing Iris's terse instructions with focused attention. One afternoon, as they cleaned the .22 rifle Iris used for teaching, Tessa shared fragments of her past: an abusive relationship, a midnight escape, constant looking over her shoulder. In return, Iris offered small pieces of herself. Desert nights under foreign stars, the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. Their conversations, sparse at first, gradually flowed more freely across the generational divide. Iris found herself looking forward to their sessions, not just for the company, but for the unexpected feeling blooming in her chest: purpose. "You're not teaching me to kill," Tessa said one day, as they walked back from the makeshift range. "You're teaching me to live without fear." For the first time in 29 years, Iris wondered if weapons could protect without destroying. If perhaps, through Tessa, she might find a different kind of redemption than the one she'd stopped hoping for long ago. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light as Iris McCready hauled boxes from the darkest corner of her barn. Spring cleaning was her ritual, one that kept her hands busy while her mind wandered. The weathered structure had stood longer than she had, its beams holding secrets of 3 generations. Behind a stack of moldering newspapers and beneath a tarp stiff with age, something caught her eye: a walking stick she hadn't seen in 30 years. Her breath caught. This wasn't just any stick, but her brother's favorite hiking companion, carved from mountain ash. "Thomas," she whispered, running calloused fingers along its length. The wood felt warm, despite decades of darkness, as if it had been waiting for her touch. Thomas had vanished overseas when she was still in uniform. His body never recovered, his final mission classified beyond her reach. As she turned the stick in her hands, sunlight caught strange markings near the handle. Not the natural grain of wood, but deliberate notches and symbols. Squinting, the silver-haired woman carried it to better light, recognition dawning slowly. This was Thomas's code, the same they'd used as children to mark secret hideouts in these very hills. Iris sank onto an old milking stool, deciphering the message with trembling fingers. The markings spoke of water sources, mineral deposits, and something more alarming: coordinates matching exactly where the developers had first broken ground. Thomas had known something valuable lay beneath Spruce Hollow's surface, something worth protecting or exploiting. "You knew," she murmured, tracing the final symbol, their childhood warning for danger. All this time, you were trying to tell us. Memories flooded back. Thomas's increasing paranoia before his final deployment, his cryptic letters about resources worth more than gold, his insistence that she learn the valley's every contour. His disappearance had never made sense. A special forces operator with 20 years' experience simply vanishing during what should have been a routine operation. The walking stick felt heavier now, weighted with purpose. Outside, the valley stretched green and vulnerable, its secrets stirring beneath the surface. The fight brewing in Spruce Hollow wasn't new. It was the continuation of something Thomas had seen coming decades ago. Iris carried the stick back to her house, mind racing. The developers weren't just after scenic views for wealthy vacationers. They were after something beneath the soil, something Thomas had died trying to protect. She placed the walking stick beside her Barrett rifle, two relics of different battles converging into one. Whatever war her brother had been fighting had found its way home, and the retired soldier realized with cold clarity that she was now the only one left to finish what he had started. For 117 years, the Harvest Moon Festival had marked autumn's arrival in Spruce Hollow. Iris McCready stood at the edge of the town square, watching generations of tradition dissolve before her eyes. The handcrafted banner that normally stretched across Main Street, lovingly embroidered by Mara's grandmother decades ago, had been replaced by a glossy vinyl sign reading Spruce Hollow Sustainability Summit. Building tomorrow together. "They've even changed the cider recipe," whispered a voice beside her. Tessa Caldwell clutched a paper cup, her face pinched with disappointment. "It's some organic apple-pomegranate fusion now. Tastes like medicine." Where quilts had once hung from the ancient oak, each square telling a family story stretching back to the valley's earliest days, now fluttered corporate banners in muted earth tones. The traditional fiddle players had been replaced by a DJ spinning ambient nature sounds from a sleek booth powered by conspicuously placed solar panels. "Progress requires evolution," Clive Marston announced, from a temporary stage erected where the pie judging table should have been. His tailored suit seemed to repel the autumn dust that coated everyone else. "We're honored to help Spruce Hollow step into a sustainable future while honoring its rustic charm." Several older women from the quilting circle stood with arms crossed near the cider station. Iris recognized the stance, the same quiet, immovable resistance these mountains had always bred in their daughters. Eleanor Jenkins, 83 and sharp as a tack, finally stepped forward. "You've replaced our stories with your logos," she called out, her voice carrying across the square. "That's not progress. That's erasure." Clive's smile never faltered. "We've actually created a digital archive of your lovely quilts. They'll be featured in our resort app, reaching thousands more people than this local gathering ever could." A PR woman, whom Iris couldn't bear to acknowledge as her daughter, smoothly intercepted Eleanor, guiding her toward a demonstration booth. "We're incorporating traditional crafts into our sustainability education program," she explained loudly enough for onlookers to hear. Mara Doyle appeared at Iris's side, her librarian's badge still pinned to her sweater. "They've rewritten our festival permit. The town council never approved these changes." Iris watched as families drifted between corporate booths, accepting branded reusable water bottles and pamphlets about the resort's minimal ecological footprint. The scent of artificial cinnamon hung in the air, where wood smoke and fresh-baked pies should have been. "They're not just taking our land," Iris murmured, her fingers instinctively seeking the comfort of a rifle trigger that wasn't there. "They're taking our memory of it first." The July sun beat down mercilessly on Spruce Hollow as Iris McCready knelt beside the community well, her weathered hand touching the dry stone rim. For 73 years, this well had never failed, not even during the drought of 1989. The 67-year-old woman frowned, her silver braids swinging as she peered into the darkness below. 3 weeks without rain isn't enough to explain this, she muttered, pulling herself up with practiced ease, despite her age. By noon, a dozen residents had gathered around the well, plastic containers clutched in anxious hands. Tessa arrived with her son, worry etched across her face. "My garden's almost gone," she said. "Everything's wilting faster than I can water it." Iris nodded grimly. "It's not just the rain. Something's changed in the watershed." That evening, Gene Harper called from the radio station. "The developers claim it's just natural drought patterns," he said, his voice crackling through the old receiver. "They're offering bottled water deliveries as a community service." "Convenient timing," Iris replied, studying a topographical map spread across her kitchen table. "I need your satellite images from last month." Before dawn the next morning, the retired veteran set out with her backpack and walking stick. She followed the creek's path upstream, noting how the normally vibrant vegetation had turned brittle and brown. 3 miles in, she discovered the first diversion pipe, cleverly disguised beneath brush and fallen logs. By midday, Iris had documented 5 separate water redirection systems, all leading toward the future resort site. The equipment bore no markings, but the precision of installation betrayed professional engineering. Nora Doyle met her at the library's back entrance, despite the charred remains of the main building still cordoned off. "They've filed for emergency water rights," the librarian whispered, passing over a stack of documents. "Claiming essential infrastructure needs under subsection 23.4. "Legal loopholes," Iris muttered, scanning the papers. That Friday, when Clive Marston arrived for his weekly community update at the diner, he found 30 farmers waiting, their sun-hardened faces set in determination. Iris stood silently in the corner, a folder of photographs and GPS coordinates in her hands. "You're stealing our water," said old Frank Wilson, his voice trembling with rage. "My corn's dead. My cattle are suffering." Marston smiled smoothly. "Now, these drought conditions are unfortunate, but I assure you—" Iris stepped forward, placing her evidence on the table. "Coordinates, timestamps, and flow calculations," she said quietly, "plus Montana water rights statutes that you violated." The suave resort leader's smile faltered as he flipped through the meticulous documentation. "We know what you're doing," Tessa added, standing tall beside her mentor. "And we're not letting you drain us dry." As Marston left, Lena Bright caught Iris's eye from her police cruiser across the street, giving an almost imperceptible nod. The battle lines were being drawn, and Spruce Hollow was finding its voice. The static came first, a soft hiss that pulled Iris McCready from her dreamless sleep. She hadn't touched the old military radio in nearly 3 decades, keeping it buried beneath quilts in her cedar chest like a memory that shouldn't be disturbed. Yet there it was, crackling to life at 2 in the morning, as if summoned by some unseen hand. "Mockingbird, this is Blue Jay. Valley has eyes in the sky. Repeat, eyes in the sky." The voice was distorted, but unmistakable, using call signs from another lifetime. Iris sat upright, silver braids falling over her shoulders as she fumbled with the dial, trying to clear the signal. Her fingers remembered the motions despite the years, muscle memory outlasting intention. By dawn, she was navigating the dirt road to Eugene Harper's place on the edge of town. Gene had converted his garage into a makeshift radio station after losing the use of his legs in the same conflict that had sent Iris retreating to Montana's solitude. The small broadcast setup served both as the community's emergency channel and his personal sanctuary. "I thought we retired those call signs in another lifetime," Gene said, wheeling himself toward the equipment rack when she played him the recording. His weathered face creased with concern. "Mockingbird was always you, and only 3 people knew that," Iris replied, leaning against his desk. "One's dead, one's you, and the third disappeared after Kandahar." Gene's fingers moved expertly across his equipment, enhancing the audio. "This frequency isn't commercial, it's military adjacent, possibly contracted private security. He looked up at her, eyes narrowed. What would they be watching for? Iris thought of the developers' perfect smiles, their sudden interest in a forgotten valley. Something worth more than ski slopes. They spent hours triangulating the signal. Jean's technical skills sharpened rather than dulled by retirement. By midday, they had plotted a pattern of transmissions that formed a surveillance grid over Spruce Hollow. Far too sophisticated for a civilian operation. They're using satellite imaging, probably thermal, Jean muttered, showing her the data points. This isn't resort planning, this is tactical reconnaissance. Iris felt a familiar coldness settle in her chest. The Barrett wasn't just for show, was it? She asked quietly. They're treating our home like a battlefield. Jean reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite everything. The question is, who's commanding the operation? Because whoever sent that warning is risking everything to alert us. As she left the station, Iris scanned the clear Montana sky, seeing it differently now. Not as open space, but as a vantage point for unseen watchers. The valley she'd chosen for its peace had become something else entirely, contested ground. The acrid smell of smoke lingered for days after the fire. Mara Doyle stood in the charred remains of what had been Spruce Hollow's library for over 70 years. Her fingers blackened as she sifted through soggy, burned pages. The fire had started just after midnight, when no one was around to witness the first flames licking up the wooden shelves. The county records were right here, Mara whispered, pointing to a collapsed cabinet. Her voice cracked with emotion. Land deeds dating back to 1893. Original treaties, all gone. Iris McCready moved carefully through the debris, her experienced eyes scanning for patterns. 29 years away from combat hadn't dulled her ability to read destruction. This wasn't random. The burn pattern centered precisely where the historical documents had been stored. The sprinklers never activated, the librarian noted, brushing ash from her glasses. They were inspected just last month. Iris knelt to examine the electrical panel, now a melted tangle of wires. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. News traveled fast in Spruce Hollow. Tessa Caldwell arrived with thermoses of coffee, her young son trailing behind her. The boy's eyes widened at the destruction, his small hand clutching his mother's jacket. Those documents were our strongest legal defense, Tessa murmured to Iris. Without them, the developers can push through faster. Lena Bright arrived in her patrol car, official notepad in hand, but concern etched across her face. She embraced Mara briefly before stepping back into her professional role. Fire inspectors coming from Billings, she said, won't be here until tomorrow. Convenient timing, Iris remarked, watching Lena's expression carefully. That afternoon, Jean Harper's voice crackled over the community radio. Special broadcast regarding our library. Donations can be brought to the station. Remember, Spruce Hollow stands together. As twilight fell, Mara and Iris sat on the steps of the ruined building. The librarian pulled something from her bag, a leather portfolio, edges singed but contents intact. I've been taking the oldest maps home each night to digitize them, she explained, opening it to reveal delicate, hand-drawn boundaries of the valley. Not everything was lost. Iris felt a flutter of hope. Smart woman. But I can't prove the fire wasn't an accident, Mara said, frustration evident. And without proof? Sometimes evidence comes from unexpected places, Iris replied, thinking of the military-grade surveillance she'd spotted near the development site. We just need to know where to look. As they spoke, Clive Marston's sleek vehicle cruised slowly past the library ruins. He didn't stop, but his gaze lingered on the two women, his expression unreadable behind tinted windows. The blizzard descended without warning, a white wall of fury that swallowed Spruce Hollow whole. Weather forecasts had predicted a light dusting, but by nightfall, 3 feet of snow had buried roads and cut power lines. Iris McCready stood at her window, watching the storm transform the familiar landscape into something alien and treacherous. Her phone rang, Mara Doyle's panicked voice cutting through static. The Hendersons and 4 other families are stranded in the North Ravine. Their vehicles got stuck trying to get home from the council meeting. Iris didn't hesitate. "I'm getting the snowmobile ready." 20 minutes later, she was securing emergency supplies while Tessa Caldwell appeared at her door, determination etched across her face. "I'm coming with you," she announced, already zipping up a thermal jacket. "This isn't target practice," Iris warned, but recognized the resolve in the younger woman's eyes. The snowmobile roared to life, its headlight barely penetrating the swirling white chaos. Visibility was near zero as they plunged into the storm, Tessa clinging tightly behind Iris. The older woman felt the weight of responsibility. 11 lives depending on her memory of terrain now hidden beneath snow. Halfway to the ravine, they became disoriented. The familiar landmarks had vanished, and even Iris's internal compass wavered. It was Tessa who suddenly tapped her shoulder. "The wind's different here," she shouted over the howling storm. "It's curving around the Miller's Rock Formation. We need to head east." Iris realized Tessa had been paying attention to more than just shooting lessons. She'd absorbed Iris's teachings about reading the land. Following her guidance, they found the stranded families huddled in their vehicles, shivering and frightened. Jean's voice crackled through the radio Iris had brought. "Lena's organizing a warming center at the council building. Power's still on there." One by one, they ferried people through the blizzard. Children wrapped in emergency blankets, the elderly secured tightly against the biting cold. Iris and Tessa worked in seamless coordination, their earlier mentor-student dynamic evolving into partnership. When the last family was safely delivered, exhaustion hit them both. In the warmth of the council building, Lena Bright distributed hot drinks while Mara organized sleeping arrangements. The rescued families embraced Iris and Tessa with tearful gratitude. "We wouldn't have made it without you," whispered Mrs. Henderson, her grandchild sleeping against her shoulder. As dawn broke and the storm finally subsided, Iris observed the transformed community. People who had been divided over the developer's promises now worked together, sharing resources and comfort. The librarian and the police officer moved in perfect sync, their relationship strengthened rather than strained by crisis. Tessa caught Iris's eye across the room and smiled. No longer just a student, but a proven ally. In facing the blizzard together, Spruce Hollow had discovered its collective strength, a unity that would prove essential for the battles yet to come. Tessa's son, Max, had always been drawn to the hills like a moth to flame. While the adults argued about property lines and water rights, the 7-year-old followed a curious fox through the underbrush, scrambling over limestone outcroppings until he slipped through a narrow crevice that adults would have walked past without noticing. When Max didn't return for lunch, Tessa Caldwell felt her heart climb into her throat. She called Iris immediately, her voice tight with fear. The older woman was at her door within minutes, tracking equipment in hand. "He knows these hills," Iris reassured her, silver braids swinging as she studied the ground. "Look, there, small footprints heading northwest." They found him sitting cross-legged at the mouth of a cave, eyes wide with wonder, hands carefully arranged in his lap as if he'd been told not to touch anything valuable. "I found the old people's things," he whispered, pointing into the darkness. The beam of Iris's flashlight revealed what made the boy pause. Clay vessels with intricate patterns, stone tools arranged in careful circles, and paintings that stretched across the limestone walls. Handprints in ochre and figures dancing beneath constellations that still wheeled overhead each night. "This is Blackfeet," Iris murmured, recognizing symbols her brother had once shown her. "And older, too. Maybe Salish." The significance wasn't lost on either woman. The cave sat directly beneath the proposed helipad site, the centerpiece of Clive Marston's luxury transportation network for wealthy resort guests. By nightfall, Mara had arrived with her camera, documenting everything with reverent precision. Jean made calls from his radio station, his voice crackling with urgency as he reached out to tribal representatives and archaeological experts. The town council convened an emergency session the following evening. The meeting house overflowed with residents, many standing along the walls. Eleanor Whitehorse, whose grandmother had passed down stories of the valley's first people, spoke with quiet authority. "What Max found isn't just artifacts," she told the assembled crowd. "It's proof this land has been sacred for thousands of years, not a playground for the wealthy." Tessa stood beside her son, one hand on his shoulder. "The developers claim they're bringing progress," she said, her voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. "But there's nothing progressive about destroying history." Iris watched from the back, noting how the librarian and her police officer partner sat with fingers intertwined, how the farmers nodded alongside the shopkeepers, how Max beamed with the innocent pride of someone who'd done something important without fully understanding why. The cave became more than a discovery. It became a symbol. Environmental concerns merged with cultural preservation, giving the community something tangible to protect beyond property values and water rights. "They'll fight this," Jean warned later, when the core group gathered at Iris's kitchen table. "Legal battles, experts who'll claim it's insignificant." "Let them," Iris replied, thinking of the Barrett rifle locked away in her closet. "Some things are worth fighting for." Iris McCready crouched beside the fallen pine, her weathered hands hovering over what definitely wasn't a bird's nest. The metallic glint had caught her eye while tracking the unusual migration patterns of deer away from their traditional feeding grounds. Now she understood why. "Well, aren't you something?" she whispered, brushing pine needles from the sleek, matte black drone wedged between branches. Its wingspan stretched nearly 4 feet, with no identifying markings except a small serial code etched near what appeared to be a camera housing. This was military-grade equipment. Iris recognized the design from her past life, though this model was far more advanced than anything she'd handled. She wrapped the device in her jacket and carried it back to her truck. The weight of it against her chest felt like a stone of dread. This wasn't standard commercial equipment. It certainly wasn't something Clive Marston's people would deploy for simple land surveys. By nightfall, Iris had driven to Eugene Harper's radio station on the outskirts of town. The small building hummed with equipment as Gene wheeled himself over to examine her find. "Good Lord, Iris," he said, adjusting his glasses. "This isn't civilian tech." Gene's fingers moved deftly across the drone's surface, finding hidden panels and access points invisible to untrained eyes. The radio operator might be confined to his wheelchair, but his mind remained razor-sharp. "Look at the transmission array," he pointed. "Encrypted military channels. And this imaging system isn't for pretty landscape photos." They worked in silence, dismantling components and connecting the drone's memory to Gene's computer. The data revealed flight patterns concentrated over Spruce Hollow for the past 3 months, long before the developers had publicly announced their interest. "These aren't Marston's people," Gene concluded, showing Iris a string of code embedded in the programming. "See this signature? It's a Black Ops division I've heard whispers about. They're using rural communities as testing grounds for domestic surveillance systems." Iris felt her stomach tighten. "So we're fighting on 2 fronts. 3, if you count whatever they're really looking for in the valley." Gene wheeled back from his desk. "The resort might just be cover for something else entirely. They agreed to keep the discovery between them for now. Tessa and Mara had enough to handle with the community resistance efforts." As Iris drove home, the valley's familiar shadows suddenly seemed filled with watching eyes. The threat to Spruce Hollow ran deeper than luxury condos and golf courses. Someone was using their home as a battlefield for something far more insidious. And battlefields were something Iris understood all too well. The town hall was packed beyond capacity, folding chairs crammed between wooden pews, as Clive Marston took the stage. His tailored suit and practiced smile seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights as he unfolded a yellowed piece of paper with theatrical care. "My great-grandfather, William Marston, was among the first to settle this valley," he announced, voice rich with fabricated emotion. "This deed proves our family's historical claim to these lands. I'm not an outsider. I'm coming home to honor my legacy." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Iris McCready watched from the back row, her weathered hands folded tightly in her lap. She noticed Mara Doyle slip quietly through the side door, clutching a leather-bound folder to her chest, her face flushed with urgency. The librarian waited for Clive to finish his performance before approaching the microphone. Her voice, though soft, carried steel. "I've spent 20 years archiving Spruce Hollow's history," Mara began, opening her folder. "And there was never a William Marston among our founders. The actual deed Mr. Marston displayed belongs to the Williams family, not Marston. Furthermore, census records show his family lived in Philadelphia until 1972. The room erupted. Clive's smile faltered as Mara methodically dismantled his ancestry claims with birth certificates, property records, and newspaper clippings. His heritage narrative, the cornerstone of his community acceptance strategy, crumbled before their eyes. While the confrontation unfolded, Iris slipped outside to meet Gene in his modified vehicle. The radio operator passed her a small device with a digital display. "Found this inside one of those wildlife monitoring stations they installed last month," he explained. "It's not tracking deer migration patterns." Iris studied the screen, recognizing the blinking dots as human movements, her neighbors going about their daily routines. The supposed environmental equipment was actually sophisticated surveillance technology, mapping the community's patterns and vulnerabilities. "They're watching us, not the wildlife," she whispered. Gene nodded grimly. "And these frequencies match military-grade tracking systems. Whatever they're planning goes beyond a luxury resort." Back inside, Clive was attempting damage control, but the spell was broken. Tessa Caldwell stood now, her voice steady as she questioned the environmental impact assessments. The young mother had grown confident in these public forums, no longer the frightened woman who had first approached Iris's door. As the meeting dissolved into heated debate, Iris quietly shared her discovery with Mara. The librarian's eyes widened with understanding. The deception ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The facade of progress had shattered. Spruce Hollow now knew they weren't just fighting development, they were fighting invasion. The community center buzzed with anticipation as the developers unveiled their latest presentation. Iris McCready stood at the back, arms folded across her chest, watching the polished woman at the podium with growing unease. Something about her mannerisms, the way she gestured with her right hand, the slight tilt of her head when answering questions, triggered fragments of memory Iris had long buried. When the woman turned to indicate the projected rendering of the eco-friendly resort, Iris felt the floor shift beneath her. Those eyes, the curve of that jawline. Despite the sleek business attire and carefully styled hair, Iris recognized her daughter. "Catherine," she whispered, the name escaping like a prayer. The PR representative faltered mid-sentence, her gaze locking with Iris's across the room. For one suspended moment, mother and daughter stared at each other, two strangers connected by blood and severed by time. After the presentation, they faced each other in the empty parking lot. Catherine, now calling herself Claire Westbrook, stood rigid, clutching her portfolio like a shield. 23 years, Mom, you didn't look for me." Iris's weathered hands trembled. "Every day I looked, until your father's lawyers made it clear I wasn't welcome. And now you're the local hero?" Catherine spat, "protecting this valley. Where was that protection when you were destroying villages overseas? Dad told me everything." The accusation struck like shrapnel. Iris had never spoken of Operation Silverback, the classified mission that had poisoned water sources across an entire region, leaving children sick and land barren. The mission that had broken her faith in the military she'd served. "Your father knew half-truths," Iris said quietly. "I've spent decades atoning for what we did. And now you're here to do the same thing to Spruce Hollow. Catherine's professional veneer cracked. This is different. This is progress. It's the same poison with a different label, Iris countered. I've seen the water tests, the soil samples. Did they tell you what's really in those sustainable foundation materials? Jean had helped Iris analyze the compounds, identical to those used in Operation Silverback. The realization that her daughter was unknowingly participating in the same destruction Iris once facilitated was unbearable. You always thought you knew better than everyone, Catherine said, her voice breaking. That's why I left. No, Iris replied. You left because I couldn't face telling you what I'd done, but I'm facing it now. As Catherine drove away, Iris stood alone in the gathering dusk. The battle for Spruce Hollow had just become painfully personal, pitting her need to protect the valley against her desperate hope to reconnect with her only child. Tessa Caldwell paced nervously in Iris's kitchen, her fingers trembling as she pulled a weathered manila envelope from her bag. The young mother's eyes darted toward the windows before she placed the documents on the table. I wasn't just running from a bad relationship, she confessed, voice barely above a whisper. I worked for Marston's Corporation for 3 years in their Environmental Compliance Division. Iris McCready leaned forward, her weathered hands spreading open the classified documents. Inside were detailed plans revealing the sustainable resort as a front for extensive mineral extraction operations, complete with projected environmental impact reports that had been deliberately falsified. They know I took these, Tessa continued, running a hand through her hair. That's why I came here with my son. I needed somewhere they wouldn't look immediately. The older woman studied the papers with methodical precision. This explains the military-grade surveillance. They're not just after land, they're after what's beneath it. That evening, they presented the evidence to the town council. Mara gasped audibly when she saw the projected contamination zones marked in red, directly overlapping the community well and her beloved library. Jean, wheeling himself closer to examine the maps, confirmed the technical specifications matched what they'd found in the drone. If these operations begin, Spruce Hollow becomes uninhabitable within 5 years, Tessa explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. The mineral deposits they're targeting release compounds that can't be mitigated with their proposed methods. The room fell silent until Lena Bright, still in her police uniform, stood up. We need to get these to the State Environmental Protection Office immediately. They'll have legal teams waiting, Tessa countered. We need to build community resistance first. In the days that followed, Tessa's transformation was remarkable. The woman who had arrived seeking protection now led with quiet determination. She organized a community garden on the contested land, strategically placing raised beds where drilling equipment would need access. We're not just growing food, she told the volunteers as they turned soil and planted seedlings. We're growing proof that this land sustains us. Children and elders worked side by side, their hands in the earth as Tessa moved among them, explaining sustainable growing practices she'd learned from her grandmother. Iris watched from the edge of the field, a smile softening her usually stern expression. You found your voice, the older woman said when Tessa joined her during a water break. Tessa nodded, looking out at the dozens of people working together. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't standing alone with a weapon, she replied. It's standing together with the truth. The attic of Iris McCready's home had remained untouched for years, its dust undisturbed, until necessity drove her there. Beneath weathered floorboards and hidden behind a false panel her brother had installed decades ago, she found it. A leather tube containing a meticulously hand-drawn topographical map of Spruce Hollow. My God, Thomas, she whispered, fingers tracing the careful notations her brother had made. The map showed more than just terrain. It revealed something Thomas had discovered before his mysterious disappearance overseas, a comprehensive survey of mineral deposits beneath the valley floor. Gene Harper wheeled himself closer as Iris spread the map across her kitchen table. This changes everything, he said, voice low with reverence. Those aren't just random markings. The retired soldier nodded grimly, Rare earth elements, the kind they use in precision guidance systems, advanced communications, military hardware. Her weathered hands trembled slightly. This is why they want our land so badly. That evening, Iris invited Mara to examine the document. The librarian's eyes widened as she connected the map's notations with historical mining surveys from the 19th century. The old-timers knew something was here, Mara explained, but lacked the technology to extract it. Your brother must have run geological tests. A knock at the door startled them. Tessa entered, her face drawn with worry. Two men in suits were asking questions at the store about Thomas Macready's personal effects, she reported. Said they represented a historical society. Historical society, my foot, Gene muttered, adjusting his position in his wheelchair. Military contractors, more likely. The pieces suddenly aligned in Iris's mind. The resort was merely a cover, a convenient way to secure access to the land without raising suspicions about the true objective. Clive Marston's company wasn't just building vacation homes. They were fronting for someone with far deeper pockets and more dangerous intentions. We need to move this somewhere safe, Iris decided, carefully rolling the map. If they're asking about Thomas, they know about this. Tessa volunteered to photograph the document, creating digital copies they could distribute if necessary. Insurance, she called it. Her eyes reflecting a determination that reminded Iris of herself in younger days. As moonlight spilled through the windows, Iris contemplated the valley that had been her sanctuary. The land that had healed her was now coveted for its capacity to create weapons, the very things she had sworn to leave behind. The fight just got bigger, she told her small circle of confidants. And more dangerous. They nodded solemnly, understanding that Spruce Hollow's battle had transformed overnight from a struggle for preservation into something with national security implications. The quiet valley had become valuable beyond measure, not for its beauty, but for what lay hidden beneath its peaceful surface. The town hall meeting erupted into chaos when Mara Doyle slammed the documents onto the podium. The papers, obtained through a records request she'd filed weeks ago, revealed Mayor Thompson had signed a fast-track development agreement with Clive Marston's company 3 months earlier, completely bypassing the town vote he'd publicly promised. He sold us out, Mara said, her voice trembling with rage as she faced the stunned crowd. The librarian had spent days piecing together the paper trail, working late into the night after the community had left the temporary library space set up after the fire. Officer Lena Bright stood at the back of the room, her uniform suddenly feeling like a costume. The police chief had assigned her to maintain order at the meeting. But how could she remain neutral when the mayor had betrayed everything Spruce Hollow stood for? Her gaze met Mara's across the room, a look that carried the weight of their 3-year relationship and the strain of recent weeks. As an officer of the law, Lena announced, stepping forward, I'm obligated to inform everyone that these documents appear legitimate and constitute evidence of misconduct. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The police officer had just publicly sided against the mayor. Iris Macready watched from her seat, noting how the younger woman's shoulders straightened as she made her choice. The retired veteran recognized the moment for what it was, the crossing of a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Later that evening, Mara paced the small apartment she shared with Lena. They could fire you, she said, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. Let them try, Lena replied, removing her badge and placing it on the kitchen counter. My oath is to protect this community, not help corporations steal it. Mara crossed the room and took her partner's hands. I'm proud of you, but I'm scared too. Outside their window, car headlights swept across the wall as vehicles pulled up to Iris's house across the street. The community was gathering, forming new alliances in the face of betrayal. You know what this means, Lena said quietly. The developers will push harder now. They'll claim legal standing. Mara nodded. And we'll push back harder, together. The phone rang, Gene Harper calling to say he'd broadcast the mayor's deception on tomorrow's radio program. The battle lines were being drawn clearer than ever, with neighbors choosing sides and families divided. As night fell over Spruce Hollow, Lena and Mara stood on their porch, watching the lights in Iris's windows, where the resistance was taking shape. Their fingers intertwined, both women silently acknowledging that belonging to this place, to each other, meant fighting for it, whatever the cost. The drought had come unnaturally late to Spruce Hollow. Autumn leaves hung brittle on branches, and the earth cracked beneath Iris McCready's boots as she walked the perimeter of her property. The valley seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break the tension that had settled over the land like dust. She found her daughter sitting on the porch steps, her corporate blazer exchanged for a simple flannel shirt, a small concession to her roots. "You knew what they were planning all along," Iris said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Just like I knew what we were doing overseas, even when they told us it was for the greater good." Her daughter looked up, eyes reflecting the same stubborn determination Iris saw in the mirror each morning. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. The resort was just the cover." "It always goes too far," Iris replied. "That's what I learned in the war. That's what I've been running from for 29 years. The conversation unfolded like a map of old wounds. Iris finally speaking of the foreign village where her unit had secured rare mineral deposits, leaving the land poisoned and families displaced. The same operation that had taken her brother's life and stained her soul. "I won't let you taint this valley the way I tainted that one," Iris said finally. "This isn't your battlefield, and it sure as hell isn't mine anymore." The next morning, Gene Harper's voice crackled over the community radio. The war veteran had done the unthinkable. He'd release recordings of Iris's war stories, captured during late nights at his station when the weight of her secrets had become too heavy. Iris stood frozen in her kitchen as her private shame became public knowledge. Her phone rang incessantly. Tessa, Mara, even Officer Lena called to offer support. By sunset, neighbors began appearing at her door, not with judgment, but with understanding. The librarian brought tea. Tessa arrived with her son, who handed Iris a drawing of herself standing tall on Widow's Crest. "We all have ghosts," Mara told her quietly, "but this valley needs someone who understands what's at stake." That night, as an unnatural wind stirred the dry pines, Iris cleaned her Barrett rifle with hands that no longer trembled. She understood now. Sometimes protection required action. Sometimes silence was the greater violence. The past and present merged as she worked, and for the first time in decades, Iris accepted that she could be both, the soldier who had destroyed and the guardian who could protect. The difference was in whose battlefield she chose to stand upon. The snow drifted silently over Widow's Crest as Iris McCready made her ascent, each step deliberate and measured. The Barrett 50 permit, slung across her shoulder, felt both foreign and familiar, a weight she'd carried in another life, on battlefields far from home. Frost crunched beneath her boots as she reached the summit overlooking the valley she'd protected for nearly 3 decades. Below, a convoy of black vehicles snaked along the access road. The developers had arrived with their final ultimatum, legal papers in hand that would force the remaining holdouts to surrender their land. Clive Marston stood beside the lead vehicle, his expensive coat flapping in the mountain wind as he directed workers to begin marking boundaries. The cold bit through Iris's gloves as she positioned herself behind a natural outcropping of rock. Her fingers, stiff with age and winter's bite, moved with muscle memory as she assembled the rifle. The metal parts clicked together with a precision that had never left her, despite the years of deliberate forgetting. Through the scope, she could see Tessa gathering the townspeople at the valley's edge. The young mother had transformed from a frightened woman seeking protection into a leader who now stood tall, pointing toward the crest where Iris waited. Gene had positioned his wheelchair near the community radio tower, ready to broadcast whatever happened next. Mara and Lena stood hand in hand among the crowd, their personal conflicts temporarily set aside for this moment of collective resistance. The scent of pine mingled with gun oil as Iris drew a deep breath. She wasn't here to kill. That part of her life was over. But sometimes, the 67-year-old knew peace required a demonstration of resolve. Her daughter was somewhere in that convoy, and the thought sent a pang through her chest. Some wounds would take longer to heal than others. Iris steadied her breathing, feeling the rhythm of her heart slow to a practiced cadence. The crosshairs settled on a massive boulder marking the entrance to the valley, far from any person, but impossible to miss. With exhaled breath fogging in the winter air, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report cracked across the valley like thunder breaking open the sky. Birds scattered from distant trees as the echo bounced between mountain walls. The bullet struck the boulder, sending stone fragments flying in a spectacular display that stopped the convoy in its tracks. From below, a cheer rose from the gathered community. Spruce Hollow had found its voice, a voice that would not be silenced by corporate greed or false promises. As Iris lowered the rifle, she knew this was not the end of their fight, but perhaps the beginning of something stronger than any single warning shot could express. The morning after Iris's warning shot, news vans descended on Spruce Hollow like vultures. What they found instead of violence was a community armed with truth. Tessa Caldwell stood before cameras, her voice steady as she presented the classified documents revealing the luxury resort as a testing ground for surveillance technology, meant to monitor rural populations across the country. This was never about tourism, Tessa explained, her son clinging to her leg. It was about turning our home into a laboratory. The detailed map from Iris's brother proved invaluable, showing exactly where the rare mineral deposits lay beneath their feet, minerals essential for next-generation weapons systems. When combined with Eugene Harper's radio recordings of suspicious transmissions and the dismantled drone components, the evidence became irrefutable. Within days, 3 state senators arrived, followed by federal investigators. Clive Marston's smooth-talking crumbled under questioning. The mayor resigned in disgrace. Most surprisingly, Iris's daughter stepped forward, publicly denouncing her role in the deception and offering testimony that sealed the developer's fate. "I came to destroy my mother's home," she admitted during a tense town hall meeting. "Instead, I found my conscience. By the first snowfall, construction equipment disappeared from the valley. The corporate logos came down. The developers withdrew their proposals with carefully worded statements about reassessing community partnerships. Everyone in town knew it was surrender dressed as strategy. On the winter solstice, the community gathered at the repaired library. Mara and Lena stood hand in hand beside the restored historical records. Officer Bright had chosen her side when it mattered most, redirecting police resources to protect the evidence rather than the developer's interests. Gene wheeled himself to the front, raising a toast with locally distilled spirits. "To Spruce Hollow, still standing, still ours." Later that evening, Iris walked alone to Widow's Crest, her boots crunching through fresh snow. The Barrett remained locked away, a tool she hoped never to need again. The valley spread below her, peaceful under moonlight, the scars of surveyor stakes and half-dug foundations, already softening under winter's blanket. Tessa found her there, 2 steaming mugs in hand. "You taught me to shoot," she said, passing a drink to Iris. "But you really taught me to stand my ground." Iris McCready nodded, silver braids catching starlight. The thunder of her rifle had echoed across the valley, but the sound that mattered more was the quiet determination of a community that refused to become another battlefield. Some victories don't need applause, just the simple sound of people walking freely on land they've protected together.